Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and Gamefound over the next week. If you're new here, we do this every single week going over all the upcoming campaigns. If you want to stay up to date, this is the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week. I just have one item for you this time around, and that's that there's going to be a new expansion and storage solution released for the Lost Ruins of Arnak. This one is not going to any crowdfunding platform, but this one is instead going to be a pre-order, and it will be opening up on the 11th. So if this is a game that you are a fan of, there's going to be a brand new expansion which looks like it's going to be adding a board here with multiple paths so that you can choose which ones you want to move down to access those respective bonuses. And then the storage solution is going to be coming with a big box as well as a bunch of different containers to hold all those different components. Like I said, this one isn't coming to crowdfunding, so I'm not going to be covering it in any more detail, so if you do want to check this one out, you can just go ahead and search it up yourself. But we are getting near the end of the month here, so I do like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together keeping track of all these campaigns, and I do this every single week, but he posts a video at the start of each month going over the entire month and letting you know of the heavy hitters that you can look forward to. It looks like March is going to have quite a lot of campaigns, at least from this first week here, because we do have 15 games to cover just this week. So I think he'll have a lot to go through in this next video, and if you do want to check that one out, he will be posting up really soon, and you can find a link to his channel in the description below, and of course check out all of his other awesome content as well. But that's everything I got for an intro, and like I said, we do got quite a few games to cover, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on March 1st, and this one is for the Pocket Picks, and this one is a campaign that's going to be featuring 4 different games from 4 different indie designers, and all of these games do play very different from each other. But the first one we're going to go over is called Dungeon Dudes, and this one is a solo dungeon crawler where you're going to be choosing a hero at the start of the game, and there is a bunch of different heroes to choose from, and each of them are going to have different abilities and actions that you can use. But you're going to be moving through the 6 different levels of the dungeon, fighting monsters and discovering whatever items and gear you can find along the way. And of course, to fight these monsters and get through the different challenges of the dungeon, you're going to be rolling dice, and then you're going to be assigning those dice to your different gear and abilities in order to activate those actions by rotating those associated cards with a slightly different effect depending on what it gets rotated to. Not a whole lot more info on this one, but if you do make it all the way through the dungeon, then you have won the game. The next game offered in this campaign is called Guards and Goblins, and this one is also a solo game, but this one is a solo tile laying game. And the way that this game works is that you're going to have all these different cards shuffled at the beginning of the game, and then you're going to be maintaining a hand of 3 of them. These cards are broken into 4 different sections that can feature different guards, houses, or goblins. And what you're going to be doing here is placing these cards out on the table one at a time, making sure that they are either touching or overlapping. And what's neat about placing these cards out is that anytime that you're able to get the guards adjacent to each other, they will actually pool together, increasing their overall strength. And what you're trying to do is have more strength with your guards than any of the individual goblins that are on any of those guards' tiles. Of course, it'd be a lot easier if you cover up the goblin with one of your other cards, but that is not allowed in this game, making it a bit more of a challenge. Next, we have Square City, which is a 2-player competitive area control game where players are going to be taking turns placing square cards into a shared city layout, trying to play the right cards at the right time in order to expand their influence and gain control of the various districts. Anytime that you're able to do this, you're going to be putting your cube out in that area, indicating that you currently have influence over it, and the most colored cubes at the end of the game is going to be the winner of the game. And the player with the most cubes in play after all the cards have been played is going to be the winner of the game. And finally, we have Gordon Chip offered in this campaign, which is a dice manipulation game for 2 to 4 players, and players are going to be competing to help Gordon capture the highest frequency signals each and every round. Players will all be rolling their dice, and then each player is going to decide whether they want to keep that roll or if they want to roll and potentially get something better, of course risking losing what they've already rolled. There are also some different tools that you'll all have accessible to you that you'll be able to use a limited number of times, and you can use these to manipulate your final results in order to make your less exciting rolls a little bit better. If any of these games look interesting to you, you can go ahead and check them out, and I will have the campaign linked in the description down below. Also on March 1st, we have Victory Garden, and this one is a competitive roll and write that does play over a number of rounds. And each round, there's going to be some dice that are rolled, and then players are going to be taking turns drafting a single die. Each of these dice are going to correspond to the different regions out on your board. Players will then each take 2 actions filling in the different locations within the different regions, and your first action can be any location that you want, but then your second action has to correspond to the die that you drafted. Actions allow you to fill in bubbles in the different locations that you choose, with some of these bubbles also having a resource outlined within it, indicating that you also have to spend that resource. Some of these locations luckily do also grant you with resources when you do complete them. You're going to be keeping track of all of this in the center of your sheet, where you're going to have all of the different types of resources that you can collect. You're going to be marking off every time you gain one and every time you spend one. Completing all the different locations within a zone does grant you with victory points, and you're going to be getting more victory points if you're able to do it before the other players. After all players have taken their 2 actions, you're going to be moving into a secondary phase within the round where each player is going to be able to take 2 market actions. You can use this action to just gain one of the goods cards in the center of the table, and this is just going to grant you with whatever good is outlined on that card. But if you do already have some goods that you can spend, you could choose to either buy a recipe or an event, with the recipes granting you with some amount of victory points and some amount of resources, but then the events are just going to be granting you with victory points, but they will give you a lot more. The game continues like this over a number of rounds, and the player with the most victory points at the end wins the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And I'm just going to give this next one a quick mention because I just found out about it and haven't had a chance to look into it in too much detail, but this one's going to be launching on March 3rd, and this one is called The Souls. And this one looks like a game that can be played in a variety of different ways, and players will all be playing as different characters that have their own unique abilities and unique goals that they're trying to achieve to win the game. But this one does look like a bit of a sandbox game where there's a whole bunch of different options that you can choose from on a given turn, and you can explore different locations, draw different event cards, or find different enemies that you can fight, and you'll be able to level up your character in a variety of ways and craft different items and gear, and you'll be performing different skill checks, rolling dice, and then adding them to your stats to see if you are successful. The game does allow you to play cooperatively or competitively, so I think there's going to be some different objectives depending on what you're trying to complete or depending on the scenario that you're playing through. If you do want to learn more about this one, though, I will have it linked down below. On the 3rd, we have Suros, The Other Dimension, and this one is a relaunch of a campaign that did launch a few months back, so I already did cover this one, and I'll roll that footage for you in a second here. But this one is a cooperative boss battler, and they did rename the game here, and it looks like they might have changed some artwork as well, so I'm not sure on all the changes that they've made in this version. I imagine it will still play very similar to my previous footage, but if you do want to see what's new with this game and what exactly they've changed, definitely feel free to check out the campaign that I'll have linked down below. But if you just want to get a quick idea of how the game might play, I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And in this game, players are going to be fighting against mutated beasts that have been altered by a mysterious substance. Each of the beasts come with their own set of combat cards as well as unique effects that they're going to be introducing into the game, and if they're not taken care of, they're going to be growing stronger and transforming through different stages. The game alternates between the player's phase and the enemy's phase, but on a player's turn, they'll be able to spend action points in order to move their character around on the board, use abilities, heal, craft, or equip and remove gear, or attack one of the various enemies. And the way that you do that is through dice rolling, and if you do roll a value that you're not particularly happy with, you can spend an action point for each die that you want to re-roll. And if you are able to defeat the enemy, you'll be able to harvest their body parts as resources, which you can then spend for crafting. You can craft all sorts of different items and gear, which you can see on the left-hand side here, but once it does get into the enemy's turn, you're essentially going to be drawing a card from the enemy deck and just resolving its effects, and this can have all sorts of negative consequences to the players. But the game continues like this until the players are defeated or they defeated the enemy boss, and in that case they win the game. And if you do want to check this one out in more detail, I will have it linked in the description down below. On the 4th, we have ZeroDay.exe, and this one is another cooperative game, but this one is a cooperative dungeon crawler where players are going to be fighting back against a whole bunch of AI enemies, building their deck and working together to try and reclaim the city. This one is also a campaign that I did cover in the past, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. But if you do want to learn more about this one, and if there's anything new that's been added since the last campaign, campaign, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. Each player is going to be playing as a unique character that's going to have their own stats and abilities, but then each session you're going to have a randomized operation where you're going to be completing operation-specific objectives like downloading hacks, attacking enemy AI robots, scavenging parts, and then using those to build mods and items. Once the operation objectives are complete, it's going to be followed by another randomized boss operation. But each round, players are going to be playing cards in order to determine your initiative order, and you're going to be drawing a card for each enemy, and the lower initiative dictates who is going to be going first. This, of course, allows you to throw the first punch, but it can also cause your enemies to become more aware of you because there's a chance that threat can be generated, and if enough threat is generated, it can actually upgrade your enemies, making them more difficult to overcome. But then each character is going to be taking their turns according to that initiative order, and for the enemies, they're going to be moving and attacking based on their card. But then for each player's turn, they're going to have a number of movement points that can be used at any point during their turn, but the first thing that they're going to do is gain 1 shift. This is a special resource that you'll be able to spend in order to manipulate your tiles on your board in order to activate cards. This is a primary mechanism in the game because one of your actions is to actually play a card to the top of your board, and each one of these cards is going to have a pattern of icons ranging from 1 to 3 icons, and in order for that card to activate, the tiles on your board need to match that same pattern. This is why it's nice to have that shift resource to get those tokens in the proper order that you need. But like I said, players are going to be able to move up to their movement points at any point throughout their turn, which means that you can split it up, and you can also use your skills that are not on cooldown for free, but then you're also going to be getting 2 action points that you can spend to perform some various actions. The first action is the one that I just mentioned, where you'll be able to play cards onto your board, and each card's going to have that pattern of tiles, and you're going to be trying to match that with the tiles on your board. But the thing is, when a card gets activated this way, it's actually going to be flipping those tiles over, creating a new pattern, which could also chain into other cards getting activated. As you play these cards to the top of your board, they're going to be moving 1 space over to the right each and every round, and once a card falls off the board, you're going to be getting it back into your hand. But you can also use those action points to heal yourself or adjust those tiles without using shift, or even to access an adjacent terminal in order to boost your stats out on the board. And of course, you can use those actions to attack enemies that are in your line of sight. What's neat about the combat in this game is that each character is going to be dealing either cyber damage or physical damage, and each enemy is going to have a different resistance to one type of damage. Combat is deterministic in this game, meaning that you're just going to be comparing your damage output to their defense, and then they're going to be taking damage equal to the difference. And when you do defeat an enemy, you're going to be gaining parts which you can use for different upgrades. One of those will allow you to upgrade your skills and character cards, while another is going to allow you to build permanent cybernetic enhancements that you can equip to any of your characters. And then another is going to allow you to build powerful one-use items. And then the final type is a wild that you can just use for any one of those 3 that I just mentioned. But when you gain that one, it also gains you threat. Something else that's neat about your cards is that rather than playing them onto your board, you can just hang onto them, and each one of these cards is going to have a secondary action that you can use when it's not your turn in order to help the other players, either by defending them, adding additional damage to enemies, or manipulating enemy movement. Like I mentioned, this is a deck building game, and one of the ways that you're going to be building your deck is at the start of each round. Each player is going to be drawing 3 cards and choosing one to add into their deck. And then also all players are going to be drawing up to their hand limit. But the rounds continue like this until players complete their operations, and if this one does sound interesting to you, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And also launching on the 4th, we have Grave Trigger, and this one is a competitive miniatures game in a post-apocalyptic science fiction world. This is a game that does offer a whole bunch of different scenarios for players to play through, and each of them are going to have their own unique setup, rules, and objectives to try and complete, and players are going to be choosing their characters at the beginning of the game, which also come with their own unique abilities, starting gear options, as well as objectives to complete for upgrades. This is a game that does play over a series of rounds, and players are going to be placing movement tokens out on the board during their turn in order to indicate where they are going to be moving to, and then players are also going to be choosing order cards to assign to each of those characters. Actions are then going to resolve in initiative order, and players will be moving each of their characters to that character's movement token, revealing the card that they have assigned to it, and then activating any of the actions on that card. Actions can allow you to attack your opponents in a number of different ways, interact with different points of interest, or even mutate the terrain in a variety of ways, which can allow you to create cover or elevation for yourself, or even push characters into new locations. There are also a bunch of different things that you can do to augment your movements or actions, and there's also ways that players can evade or block as well, and the game also does come with its own measuring tool, so you don't have to use a ruler or anything like that. Everything is provided in this game. If this one does sound interesting to you, go ahead and check it out, and I will have it linked down below. And the next campaign is also launching on March 4th, and this one is a 2-player head-to-head game called Dionysia, and in this game players are competing to try and create the best play made up of 3 different acts. Each player is going to be drafting cards from the center stage and then assigning them to one of the locations within their 3 acts, each being made up of a column of 3 cards. Each of the cards are going to feature 2 different objectives that you can try to complete in order to score victory points. One is going to be a one-time scoring condition based on whatever it's asking you to do, but then the other one is going to be based on a pattern, and you can actually create multiple of these patterns within your tableau in order to complete that objective multiple times, but the pattern can only be made from left to right or top to bottom. And I do want to thank Button Shy Games for sending me a prototype version of this game so I can show you a few rounds and give you even more info as to whether or not this might be a game for you. And this is a really easy game to set up and play because all you got to do is shuffle the 18 cards and then reveal 3 of them, and then each round each player is going to be taking turns drafting 1 card from this display, and then at the end of the round it's going to get refilled back up to 3 with the one that was unchosen still remaining in that selection. And like I said, you're trying to draft to the cards that work best for you in order to complete the different objectives outlined on those cards in order to score the victory points. And I did mention that most of these do have 2 different objectives that you can try to complete. The one on the left is going to give you a specific instruction as to what you do, while the one on the right is going to just require you to create certain patterns within your tableau. One thing to note is that some of these cards do actually just grant you victory points for acquiring that card and then also grant you a special ability. And this is a 2-player game, so I'll just be acting as both the players, and for my first turn, I'll just go ahead and draft this one so we can see what this special ability is all about. And this is going to allow me to view the top 2 cards of the deck, and I can return 1 to the top and return 1 to the bottom. And this instantly gives me 2 victory points, but it also wants me to create patterns of 2 swords and 1 skull, so I do want to keep my eye out for those. And I do have the option to put this into any of the 3 acts that I choose. I don't have to start left to right or anything like that. I just have to announce to the other player which act I am putting this in. And I'll just go ahead and say that this is my second act, which would be putting it in the center of my tableau. And then I get to activate its special ability, and we get to look at these 2 cards on top of the deck, and this one looks really valuable to me since I do want 2 of these swords side by side, so I'll be keeping that one on the top and sending this other one to the bottom. And the other player is going to be taking this last card here for a very specific reason, and the reason that the player is picking this one is because the icons on this card already help complete more than half of that pattern, so they're going to be putting this in their first act. Now we just move into the second round, and we're going to be revealing 2 more cards to replace the 2 that were taken. And then it's the other player's turn to go first, so I'll just indicate this by putting this deck to the other player's side. And I was thinking about taking this card because if I were to put it here, it would complete both of these patterns, since this one wants 3 swords in a row and this one wants the chalice and 2 swords. But this one only grants you the 2 victory points here if it's an Act 1 scene at the top. On the other hand, I do know this is valuable to my opponent because he does want to create patterns with these swords, so I think I'll take it anyway, and I think I can still use it because I can actually slide it under this card. And the reason that this is still a nice move for me is because it's now allowing me to complete this pattern in a horizontal move as well as a vertical one. The other player is going to be taking this card because the pattern it wants uses the same icons as the previous card, and it also just grants bonus victory points if there's no chalices in the column that this card is in, so I think that all works well for my strategy here, and I'll be putting this in my third act. And that ends the round, and we just go ahead and draw 2 more cards and then move this deck over to indicate that it is now the left player's turn to go first. And this player is going to go ahead and take this card and slide it under this one, which allows them to create this pattern again, going straight down. And then the other player is going to take this card, which wants chalices and swords, which is what they already have in their tableau. And I'm not allowed to put this card here because I did say that this was going to be my first act. So I'm just going to put this to the right of that card for now, but it might get moved around in the future, and I'll show you exactly how that works when we get to it. Let's go ahead and reveal 2 more cards. Pass this to the other side, and this player is going to go ahead and take this card, and they are actually going to put this in the second act. And what they're going to do is overlap that previous one, and then this card now becomes the primary scene for this column, meaning that its objectives are now what you are able to try and score in order to gain those victory points. I think this one works a little bit better for us because we're already achieving this objective right here. And there's a couple other patterns here that if we get 1 more chalice on, we can also easily fulfill that. But now let's go to the next player's turn. And I did say that this was my second scene, which means that I can no longer put a scene on the right here. So I can either put this above or below my existing cards, or put it all the way on the left here. And I think that's what I'm going to do because this does help me complete this pattern once, and then it does introduce a new pattern that wants both swords and skulls, which is pretty much my whole tableau here. So I do think that's a good play. So let's move into the next round, reveal a couple cards, move this to the other side, and it is the left player's turn to go again. And I think I'm going to go ahead and take this one because it's going to help me fulfill this objective, which is worth 2 victory points, while my other ones are worth 1. So I do want to try and achieve this one as much as I can. So I'm going to slide this one under here so I can start creating that pattern of 2 swords and then hopefully a skull down here. And I do know that there will at least be 1 card at the start of the next round that does have a skull in the location that I need. And I don't think this player wants to create a new column with any one of these 2, so I think they're just going to slide it under here, which is going to help them complete this pattern once again. And then we just go ahead, reveal 2 more cards, and then it's the right player's turn to go first. And for this player, I think they're going to go ahead and take this card. It's going to be scoring them 2 victory points right away if it is the Act 3 key scene. And it also helps complete the central pattern here, as well as the pattern that is indicated on itself. The left player can use either one of these cards really, but I guess they're going to take the left one just because they know their opponent is going for these chalices. It doesn't really make a difference to them, so they're going to slide that under here, which helps complete that sword skull, which is worth 2 victory points. Then we'll reveal 2 cards for the next round, and then it's this player's turn to go again. This card's perfect because it can slide right under here and completes another sword skull pattern, which is worth 2 victory points. And also I am trying to get more swords than my opponent, and if I am able to do that, that's 4 victory points at the end of the game. And we were currently tied, but getting that card allows me to get 1 step ahead of them. And neither of these cards are super helpful for this player on the right, but I think what they're going to do is slide it under here. It's not really doing a lot, but maybe they can make a pattern here in the next round. Reveal 2 cards, and it's this player's turn to go again, and they got a few good options here. I think they're going to take this card, but let me see exactly what our options are. And I think they are going to take this one, and I think they're just going to go ahead and slide this one under here. It looks like there's a bunch of good options, but they all roughly amount to the same amount of victory points in the end. But I do want to finish off this column here because this one's going to be scoring me victory points if there's no skulls in it. And I do see that there's a card with skulls out right now, and I really don't want to get stuck with that for the next round. And this one does also build me a pattern of 3 chalices, so it's the same difference if I were to put it here. I'm just taking a little bit less risk. The other player is going to take this card and slide it under here because it does create another sword skull pattern, which is worth 2 victory points. And then we reveal the final card here, and then the left player is going to be going again. And this really sucks for them because they weren't thinking ahead like this player, because this column also wants cards that don't have a chalice in it, and both of these cards happen to have a chalice in it, so let's see what they can do with this. This card's currently gaining them a point for every sword skull, so they have 1, 2... But I think what they're going to do is take this card because if the other player takes it, then they're going to have an equal amount of swords than us, which is going to make us lose out on those 4 victory points. But this isn't so bad because the other card was granting us 2 victory points, but this one actually gives us a victory point for every sword in our Act 2, and we have 2 of those, so that's going to be giving us 2 victory points back. But then putting this card here also fulfills that pattern, so that is another victory point. So I don't think this is too bad of a move, and I think we did a pretty good job rolling with the punches there. But then this player is forced to take that card, so we'll just slide her under here. Now we just go ahead and tally up all the victory points, and the player who has the most wins the game. The player on the left has 15 victory points, and the player on the right has 14 victory points. So this was a really tight game, but the player on the left takes the win here. And that's how you play the game. A really fun one here made up of only 18 cards. That's really easy to take along with you, and it's also only going to be $12. So if this one did look interesting to you, feel free to check it out, and I will have it linked in the description down below. And also launching on March 4th, we have Roll or Stand Jurassic Adventures. And this one is a cooperative or solo roll and write game where players are trying to complete their scenario puzzle by drawing lines from numbers rolled from a pair of dice. There's a bunch of different scenarios that you can play, and they all have different patterns and puzzles that you're trying to complete. They also have different things that you're trying to avoid that might result in penalties or even instantly cost you the game. The way the game works is very similar to blackjack, where you're going to be aiming to get as close as possible to a target value without going over or busting, and each turn you're going to be choosing whether you want to stand or hit by rolling the dice over again. At the start of the round, those 2 dice are going to get rolled, and then each player is going to be choosing any one of those 2 dice to add into a row on their sheet. If you look at the bottom right one here, you can see a 10 on the left, and then there's a bunch of different bubbles that you'll be able to write in, and the 10 is the number that you don't want to exceed. So for example, if this 2 and the 6 was rolled, I'd probably want to choose the 2 rather than the 6, and I'd go ahead and write that value into the leftmost bubble, and that's going to allow me to stay under the number 10, but then also gain the bonus in the bubble indicated above it. I could then choose if I want to play it safe and stop there, or if I want to risk it to roll again while trying to stay under that value of 10. So let's say I did roll again and I got a 4. I could then throw the 4 into that next bubble. And what's nice about this is I didn't bust, and I now get access to 2 of those resources. Since the value I'm trying not to exceed is a 10 and I've already got a 6, that allows me to get a 4 or less on either of the 2 die in order to stay in the game. And I do think those are pretty good odds, so I probably would roll again. Let's say that both of those dice rolled 5 or higher, then I would be busting, and that's going to be limiting the amount of resources that I can get for this round. And another reason why I probably shouldn't have rolled again is because each player also does have to keep track of their stamina. And the way that this works is that you have a bunch of different numbers in your stamina section of the board, and each of them is going to have a number of spaces beside it. So for example, this first row says that I can only roll a 1 once. So if that value is rolled on either of the 2 dice, whether I chose to select it or not, it's going to get crossed off here, meaning that if a 1 is rolled again, that die has to be turned a pip down, and it does cycle around to the other side of the die. So since the 1 is the lowest value, that would actually cycle it all the way back up to a 6. This gives you an additional reason not to push your luck too much, because you're going to be running out of your stamina and limiting the amount of dice that you can get. Of course, this can also work in your favor, because if you already rolled a bunch of high numbers, like I said, it always does roll down if you run out of stamina for a particular number, so it could be beneficial to you to go for extra rolls if you've already eliminated a bunch of those high numbers. But staying under that number and getting all these different bonuses is going to be granting you with an amount of lines that you can draw out onto your puzzle in order to try and complete the objectives that that particular puzzle wants you to do, and try to avoid the things that it doesn't want you to do. You do also want to complete this as quickly as you can, because if you do run out of all of your stamina before you're able to complete that puzzle, then that is another way that you can lose the game. So be strategic with your rolling, and if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked in the description down below. And the next campaign we have is also launching on the 4th, and this one is the Champions of Midgard, the 10th Anniversary Edition. And I did think this one was launching last week, so I did already publish some footage of this one, but it got pushed back until now. So if you missed last week's episode, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you. But if you do want to check it out, I will still have it linked down below. And if you're not already familiar with this game, this is a worker placement game where players are going to be trying to earn the most glory by defeating monsters. This new edition is going to be introducing brand new artwork across the board, as well as upgraded components, and it's also going to be rebalancing some of the promo and expansion content, and then of course offering everything that the game has to offer in a single big box solution. I am filming this one before the campaign's launched, so they haven't revealed too much of this content just yet, so if you do want to check it out, I will have it linked link down below. But if you're not familiar with this game, like I said, it is a worker placement game, and players are going to be playing over 8 rounds, putting their workers on different locations in order to gain the various actions or benefits there. The different locations are mainly going to be used to grant you with additional dice that you can use in battle, gain you resources that are used in a variety of ways, or gain you access to fight a certain monster. There are also locations that can grant you tokens for rerolls to make your battles a little bit easier, or you can also buy additional workers. And when you do choose to fight a monster, you can either fight the monster close to the city or in a distant land. When you're fighting a monster near the city, you're going to be reserving that monster by putting your worker under it, but then all the battles resolve at the end of the round after all players' workers have been placed. But then each of those battles are going to be resolved one by one, with each monster having a different amount of health and a different amount of damage that they can inflict on you. At the start of the battle, you get to decide which dice you want to commit to that battle, and then you're going to be rolling those dice and then inflicting the amount of damage that you roll, with some of the dice also granting you with some other abilities like defending against their attacks. But each time that you aren't able to defeat the monster is going to inflict its damage amount on you. Then you're going to have to discard the amount of dice equal to the damage that you aren't able to block. The battle continues like this back and forth until you either run out of dice, and in that case you get nothing, but if you win the battle, then you're going to be gaining the glory from that card, as well as any additional bonuses. But if you chose to fight a monster in a distant land, you're going to be looking at the bottom of the board here. And whenever you choose to fight in this area, you're still going to be choosing which monster you want to fight. But each of these different monsters are going to have a different cost associated with them for you to add dice into that battle. The cost to add dice to each of these battles is indicated on the board above the monster card that you're choosing to fight, with the rightmost ones being a little bit cheaper, granting you with 2 dice for each food, and the left ones being a little bit more difficult, only granting you 1 die per food. The catch here is that since these monsters are in a distant land, you do have to sail to them, so you're going to have to choose or purchase a boat in order to do that, and each of these boats are going to have a limited amount of capacity, and you're only going to be able to fit as many dice and food as dictated by that capacity. So you're going to have to decide what ratio of dice versus food you want to do, and this will probably also play into which monster you want to fight. Not only that, but before you're able to fight the monster, you do have to flip one of these event cards, and these are just randomly drawn out, and these can cause all sorts of negative effects that might throw some of your dice or food overboard. From then on, you're going to enter that battle with the dice you have left over and the food that you have left over to pay for them, and then the battles just resolve the same as I mentioned earlier. The rounds continue like this, with players taking their actions and fighting monsters to earn glory, but one thing that I should note about some of these action locations is that if a player doesn't choose an action location, it's actually going to get additional resources or dice added to it, meaning that if you take it on the next round, you can actually get multiple dice at once from a single location. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you want to check this one out and see everything that this new version is going to be adding, you can find it in the link down below. And this next one is also launching on the 4th, but I did kind of screw up on this one because this one's actually a new edition of a game that was released back in 2012. And when I saw this one come up in my feed, I thought I had already covered it because I did cover Manhattan Project War Machine. So when I saw this, I thought it was just an expansion for that game that I already covered. But it turns out that this is actually the original game. They just gave it a slightly different name. And it also turns out that even though these do have almost the exact same name, these are actually completely 2 different games, and this one's meant to be more of an introduction, and it doesn't actually integrate or continue what that original game had, but it does share a lot of similar elements. That being said, unfortunately, I didn't look into this one in too much detail, which is a shame because I think this one would be my pick of the week, mostly because I just jumped over to Rado's channel to check out his video on it really quick. I need to check out the whole video still, but it's a little too late for me to give you comprehensive coverage on this one, so if you do want to learn more about this game, definitely go check out Rado's video. Unless you don't want to be super hyped about this one, you might want to check out someone else, but he always does a great job, and I will be looking into this one in more detail just because it looks like a game that I'd be interested in. But unfortunately, even though I did cover Manhattan Project War Machine, I didn't actually cover this game in the past. I kind of messed up, which is bound to happen when I cover so many games, but like I said, this one is meant to be an introduction to that game, so I will just go ahead and roll this previous footage for you just to give you an idea of what you can expect. But just keep in mind that these two games do play a little bit differently from each other, and if you do want to check out this campaign, like I said, you can go ahead and check out Rado or any other channel that's covered it, and I will also have a link to the campaign in the description below where you can go ahead to click to get notified. And now I feel even more guilty for not looking into this one as much because it looks like this publisher is out of Toronto, Canada, which is literally 2 hours from me. I apologize. Check out the campaign. This game's supposed to be really, really solid. The original does have a really nice 7.3 on BGG, and it is ranked about the 500th game of all time, which is a really impressive feat. The best I can do in this short notice is roll you the footage for the War Machine version of the game, which I'll just go ahead and do now. But like I said, check out the campaign down below. And if that name does sound familiar to you, that's because there are a bunch of Manhattan Project games out already. And this game is not meant to be a continuation of that series, but rather an introduction to it. So this game is a little bit simpler than the other games in the series, and it's designed to introduce new players into what this series offers. And the main mechanism in this game is dice action selection. And the way that this game works is that each player is going to have their own personal player board, but then there's also going to be a main board where players will be performing their actions during their turn. And each player's player board is going to have a warehouse section where they can keep track of how many of each type of resource that they currently own. And then there's going to be a building section where players can add different buildings that they're able to build throughout the game. But players will also start the game with a special ability that they can use, as well as an objective card that they can try to achieve for additional victory points. And on a player's turn, you're going to be rolling the dice that you have access to, and you can re-roll these dice up to 3 times, but each time you roll them, you do have to keep 1 die. And depending on the icons that you roll, that's going to determine which actions you can perform. You'll then be able to split up your dice in order to perform whichever actions you decide, but then any of the actions that you choose are also going to give every other player at the table a smaller version of that action. Most of these actions have to do with gaining resources or converting resources into other resources, but if you do have enough resources, you can also perform the action to build a building. And as I mentioned before, when you do build a building, it gets added to your own personal player board. And the reason that's so important is because once you've performed all your actions, all your dice come back to you, and if you do have buildings available, you can actually place those dice on a building on your personal player board in order to take an additional action. So the more structures that you're able to build throughout the game, the more opportunities you'll have to activate them and get additional bonuses. And this is a really neat mechanism where players will be able to build different buildings from game to game, creating a very different engine. And of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. This next campaign is not a board game, but it is something to help you play your board games, because this is the Megan 2.0 board game table by Geek & Son, who do fantastic work and make some of the best board game tables that you can find. And this one is for their most popular design that does come in a bunch of different sizes depending on what you're looking for and your price point. And yes, they do have shorter legs if you do want to use it as a coffee table. And they do have a picture of that right here, and this is a neat idea of putting a piece of glass over the table so you can still see your game down below and have that out on display while still using it as a regular coffee table. I am actually in the market for a coffee table, so I think I'm going to check this one out. It's probably a little out of my price range, but I will take a look and compare it to some other options. And also launching on March 4th, we have Companion Quest, and this one's a cooperative game where players are going to be playing as different gnomes that each have an ability that can only be used once per game. You're going to be trying to complete different objectives as you try to catch up with a creature before it escapes. This creature is going to be on the top of the shared board, and it's going to be trying to move all the way to the right to escape through the portal. Well, the players are represented by this little gnome here, and if you're able to get on the same space as that creature, then that means you have won, but of course if they get to the portal, then you lose. But like I said, this is a cooperative game, and each player is going to be taking turns performing their actions, and at the start of your turn, you're going to be checking your location for any effects, because each player is going to have their gnome out on different locations on this location card in the center of the board, and these do change throughout the game. But each player is going to have a number of dice points, and then on their turn, they're going to be spending those to buy different types of dice. You're going to need different colors and different values in order to complete the different objective cards that allow you to move up on that track and hopefully catch that creature. But each of these different colored dice do have different costs, which does make going for certain objectives a little bit more difficult than others. What's really cool about these objective cards is that they're not only asking you to get dice of a certain color and a certain value, but a lot of them will have certain formulas on them that you're trying to achieve with the dice, which means that there are multiple ways to fulfill some of these, and that gives them a lot more depth than just trying to get certain numbers and colors. Rather than adding dice to any of those objectives, you can also spend a die to move to another location out on the location card, but each of these locations do also have dice requirements that you'll have to fulfill when spending that die in order to make that movement. The last option you have is just to pass to the next player, and you are able to give them any dice that you don't want to use or that you're not able to use. One thing the players can do to help them throughout the game is to use their different ability cards, which are going to allow you to manipulate the dice in various ways, and anytime that you use one of your cards, you do have to exhaust it, and the way that you unexhaust that card is that each of these cards is going to have either a color or a value or a combination of both indicated on that card, and if you spend a die on an objective card matching that condition, then that will allow you to also unexhaust that card. If no objective is completed on a player's turn, then that's going to cause that creature to move forward along the path, but if you are able to complete one or more objectives, that's going to be pulling that creature backwards, and it's also going to allow you to replace your current location card with a new one, and your old one is going to have a bunch of instructions and bonuses on the back of it that you'll be able to move through in order to get those benefits. The game continues like this until either that creature escapes or the players are able to capture it, and if you do want to learn more about this one, you can go ahead and check it out, and I will have a link down below. And on the 5th, we have Habemus, and this one is a game where players are trying to have a new pope elected, of course trying to get the one elected that earns them the most victory points. But this is a game where players are each going to have their own player screen, and you're going to be keeping a private objective behind that screen, but then you're going to have a public objective in front of it. Your objectives are going to have a religious order as well as 4 characteristics, but then there's also going to be candidate popes out on display in a river in front of everyone, and they're going to have their own sets of characteristics and religious order, and all the players are going to look at these popes at the start of the game, and if any of them share 3 or more characteristics with your objective, then you're going to be placing a token onto that pope just to let the other players know. Players are going to try to get influence onto these various popes in order to help get the one that earns them the most victory points elected as that pope. But the thing to know about this is that the more influence that's put out collectively is going to raise the bar of how much any individual pope needs to be elected as the pope. This creates a sort of moving post that the players are trying to chase in order to get their ideal candidates elected. But this is a game that just plays over a series of turns, and on a player's turn they can take one of 3 possible actions. You can either place any amount of your influence next to any of the candidates out on display, or instead you can pay in order to play one of your ability cards, and there's a whole variety of these with different effects, but they're mostly going to be manipulating the state of the game or harming the other players. The last option you have is to pass, and if enough players pass consecutively, then that's going to be triggering the end of the round, but then each player is going to be getting a base income of influence as well as additional influence depending on the influence that all the different popes have and how your characteristics align with those various popes. The other thing at the end of the round is that the pope with the least amount of influence is going to be removed from the race, which does also speed up the game the longer that the game goes on. The game continues like this over a series of rounds until that pope is elected, and the player that best manipulated that election is going to be the winner of the game. And also launching on the 5th, we have Nebula Drifters: The Lost Voyage, and this one is a cooperative spacefarer strategy game where players are taking on the roles of scavengers, traders, and explorers, navigating the vast reaches of space over a series of scenarios. Players are going to be controlling their space crews, trying to survive by managing their resources, upgrading their ships, engaging in trade, and dealing with threats like pirates or cosmic anomalies. Each scenario is going to have an objective that you're trying to complete, and if you're able to do that, then you have won the game. But each round, players are going to be drawing an event card that introduces a new challenge or opportunity, and it may involve skill checks or spending resources or choosing from multiple options. But players are then going to be taking turns, spending action points in order to perform actions with their crew members. These actions can allow you to do different things like control your ship and move in different directions, or even activate the hyper jump, which allows you to initiate a jump into a completely different sector, or instead you can take actions that allow you to manage the systems of the ship or issue repairs. And this plays into the survival element of the game because the ship's going to have a bunch of different tools and functions and life support that are going to help you in a variety of different ways. And if you don't have those, then that's going to make either your living conditions very difficult for your crew, or it's going to make it very difficult to defend or attack against different enemies. Of course, there are also actions that allow you to power up your boosts and shields or to perform different attacks with different weapons. And each of the crew members do also have their own special abilities that you can take advantage of or help with other players. But of course, you can also spend actions to explore and investigate different locations for different materials and resources. And you can also discover different NPCs that you can trade with and also investigate different anomalies for potential bonuses if there's a mission objective card that allows for that. Combat does also have another element to it because both you and the enemies do have the ability to board the other ship if you are close enough and you successfully attempt doing that. And if enemies or hazards are present at the end of the round, they're going to be taking their actions depending on their behavior profile. Some enemies might actively hunt the players, while others may only react if provoked. The different enemies will normally make a movement, but they might attack if they are within range, and this can cause damage to your ship and the different components and functions that it has, and it can also cause you to lose different resources that you collected, and like I said, they can board the ship and cause a bunch of harm if they are able to get on board. At this point, if there's also different environmental hazards such as asteroid fields or radiation storms, those can also trigger some negative effects as well, and players will be able to roll dice to both attack and defend from these different threats. But if this one looks interesting to you, definitely check it out. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than I've just explained, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description down below. And also launching on the 5th, we have a new expansion for the game Marrakesh, and this one is called the Gems and Experts expansion. There's not a whole lot of info as to what this expansion adds into the game, but it is going to be introducing 6 different modules. There's the gemstones, the experts, the madrasa, the wooden buildings, the elms, and the luxury goods. And these modules are all collectively going to allow you to gain gems, manufacture those gems into different types of jewelry, or even trade gems you don't need in order to gain resources. But then it's also going to be adding in those experts that are each going to have very powerful one-time use abilities, and you'll be able to hire them by paying them the resources that they need in order to gain access to those abilities. If you're not already familiar with the game Marrakesh, this is a Euro game where you're going to be playing 12 rounds across 3 eras, and at the start of a round you're going to be dropping a bunch of these little tokens into this tower here, and then players are going to be drafting these different tokens with their color indicating the part of your board that they can be placed on. And your board's made up of a bunch of different areas, and each is going to correspond to different actions you can perform, such as moving up various tracks in order to gain rewards, gaining different ability tiles, investing in continual production of resources, or even gaining points and even additional colored tokens that you can then also place out on your board. Water is also a really important aspect of this game because you will have to feed your workers, and there are also different regions that do require water in order to get activated, and you'll be trying to collect that in order to fulfill all those requirements. But there are also these red tokens as well, and you can only have one in a region, so after you've placed it there, you can no longer place another red token there. But those ones are nice because they are wild, and they also come with water, so it's as if you also spent that resource to activate that area. Some of these different areas just grant you bonuses from the board itself, but there is also a shared board that players are also going to have tokens on, and those different areas will allow you to manipulate your position out on that board, with of course the goal to gain as much victory points as possible, and the player that's able to do that the best wins the game. And if you do want to check this one out, I will have it linked down below. And that's everything for this week, but don't leave yet because we still do have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this one is for a pledge for Coral Castle. And this one is a game where players are going to be trying to play different cards and combo them together in order to move up various tracks each round. And players will be drafting cards each round while also being able to carry forward some cards each round, allowing you to try and plan out and gather the cards that you think will combo together the best. Players will gain victory points based on the criteria and multipliers of their cards, as well as how far they're able to make it up various tracks. And of course, if you're also able to make it to the end of a track, that's also going to gain you 10 victory points and allow you to put your colored coral out on the board. This giveaway is going to be for the deluxe edition of the game, which is going to get you a copy of the game plus the upgraded shells and pearls. And to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below, and you can say anything that you want, but if you are looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what your favorite sea creature is, or even mythological sea creature. For myself, seafood is my favorite type of food, so my decision is probably going to be more hunger-based. And I'm especially fond of the weird stuff like lobster, crabs, squid, or octopus, so all of those taste delicious, so any one of those could be my pick. One thing to note with this giveaway is that they are only covering shipping to the US, so if you are in the US, you can feel free to enter this, but if you aren't, you still can enter in on this giveaway. Just know that if you win, you might have to cover shipping to your area, so if you're okay with that, definitely feel free to enter as well, and I wish you all the best in this giveaway. That's the only giveaway I have queued up for this week, but if you are interested in even more giveaways, we do have a few games on the Discord that are not going to be drawn for another couple days, so if you are watching this early enough, you can go ahead and click this emoji underneath that giveaway on the giveaways channel in order to get entered to win any one of these. And with that, we reach the end of the episode, and that is everything we have this week. And as always, I do appreciate you checking out the channel and sticking around to the end. As usual, I've been super busy the past few weeks, and something's been going on every single weekend, and I do have something this weekend as well. Luckily, it's all fun stuff, and I still am finding some time to get some games in. I'm also getting a ton of shipments in all at once from games that I backed forever ago, so my stack of unplayed games is adding up, so I'm hoping to make a dent in that real soon. I also just got a whole bunch of prototype games all at once from publishers that are going to be launching games really soon, and that isn't something that I get too often, so I also have those to play through. I'm hoping to make a little bit of a dent in it this weekend, but I will have a few more playthroughs in these videos in the upcoming weeks, so that's another thing to look forward to. But that's everything I got for this week, so thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.